And most times I don't even know what I'm saying. Are there any questions? The answer is 7, 14,
7,
9.
14, 9.
Problem solved?
Yeah.
Yes.
How much is the map worth?
How much is the map worth?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna look to how well you did on it. But I might add is, I'm thinking an additional like 10 or 15 points is a lot of points. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna make it worth your while.
Yes.
If you didn't do it, it won't be worth your while. Question? Yes. Oh, the fox right here. Right here.
Fox is like, what is that?
Yeah, and they too are sent to forced here. Yes. Okay, everybody, do you want to see the mighty Pennsylvania Railroad?
Yes.
I just got a Pennsylvania Railroad t-shirt. I'm not making that up. Don't ask. The Pennsylvania Railroad went up and down the coast here, but then went up and down the coast, and then to Chicago.
Yeah,
St.
that's
Louis.
I just colors the general Pacific.
The New York Central went up and down the coast, then up through New York, and then along the coast here to Chicago. There's a lot of railroads. Oh, yeah. Chicago and Kansas City would just be massive railroad junctions. Not anymore. We only have a few railroads left. Yeah.
What were you looking for in the box? Reasons realistic.
So the reasons. They call themselves realists there, and the big thing they're worried about, if we don't have some kind of religious reform, will all the worst appetites and desires of Americans will come out, and the United States will go into decline. People will not be saved. We'll be destined to go to hell, essentially.
Moral decline.
Any other repeats? Yes. Did I say repeats? Yes.
Elizabeth Patty's
She was one of the most important leaders of the women's suffrage movement, and she was one of the major organizers of the Seneca Falls movement, and she kind of showed that middle class background. Hey, everybody, I'm helping you with these answers. If you know all the answers for this thing, I'm grading this chapter 11 thing a lot. So if related a lot, yeah. I just said it like a second ago. So basically what is all the worst appetites and desires of Americans will come out and will be destined to a track of decadence and hell. We must reform, but I gotta be very clear about something. The entire world was changing. Nothing like this has ever happened before. The Industrial Revolution was such a radical change. We can't comprehend it today. And there's a lot of changes today. It doesn't even compare to what happened with the Industrial Revolution. So everybody's belief was kind of turned inside out. It's almost like what happened with when the original Americans saw the Europeans, and like everything just blew up. That's kind of what was happening in the United States. It was that radical. Any other questions? Anything you could not find on the map? And I really want to, what was that area of New York that was known for its religious, burnt over district? And these revivals would come through. There was a lot of heaven and hell. I mean, it was fire, brimstone. And those ministers, they were called charismatics. And partially because of, if you show the charisma, the evangelical charisma of God to get people to join up, but also the big thing was their charisma pulled thing in. It was much more important than previous religions where it's dogma or interpretations of the Bible. No, it was personal. Really a big shift. Much of what evangelical religion, Christianity is today would come out of this. Oh, the Industrial Revolution changed everything. All right, if there's no more questions, anything we can't find, anything, I'll give you a chance. Yes. Salt Lake. The big thing about Salt Lake was after Mormons were ran out of Nauvoo, Illinois, and Joseph Smith was murdered by a mob, they felt no choice but to leave the country. And they picked Salt Lake because it was still part of Mexico. And since it was in a basin surrounded by desert, they would be alone. Little did they know, in a few years, they'd be part of the United States again. And they would go discover Los Angeles. That's another story. People there. These go, yeah, as a safety valve to escape. This happens. All right, any other questions? Anything? I'll be glad to answer anything. Anything. Any question you have. You just give me questions. I'll answer. Yes.
We should dig a moat on Wednesday.
Take home a what?
Dig a moat on Wednesday.
That's not really a question. That's more of a statement.
May we dig a
Well, it's
moat?
gonna
May we dig a moat? Yes, we can dig a moat on Wednesday. But
Yeah.
did you like my idea after the AP exam, we just go to random homes and dig a moat around their house? Wouldn't that be just awesome? They come home from work and there's a 12-foot moat with gators. Crocodiles or gators?
Why not?
Who said that? Yeah. Put +1 on your forehead. Anything else? You ever get with a fox? All right, put your name on it, turn them up. I will give you, I will reward you immensely for this. I know it was a little bit of work, but I. Oh. What's that? Oh, you weren't here. If you weren't here, huh? Yeah, just remind me. I won't mark it. I'll give you a couple days. Just remind me. Yeah, that's all. Just remind me. There are a few people gone.
My head's not flat. It's empty but not flat.
Why don't I have more copies of this? No, why don't I have more? Even though it's a very good chance I might have forgotten. All right, turn them in. Name on them, rank, serial number. Give nothing but that. If you're captured, name, rank, and serial number.
No, social security.
Oh, don't get your social security number out. You don't have one of these either?
No, you didn't really know
Oh, you need one too?
Same.
You need one too? I might need to make more copies. I don't know where all my copies. I made a bunch of copies. Well, I don't want to over make copies. So I'm going to give you, tomorrow, have your review list. I will narrow down the test. Just remind me after class, I'll make more copies.
And then like stuff sometimes like that's what I do. And then I have to
Yeah, I got to make more. I'll make you guys more copies. I'm gonna have to have my aide go through and organize it. All right. So did we get to Tecumseh and the Confederacy on Wednesday? I know that was a long time.
You just had us write it down, but we never talked about it.
Okay, so we talked about, okay, the Ordnance and Council, the embargo. What is the giant snapping turtle? The old grab knees. The Embargo Act went through all of that, but this Northwest, this was the big issue, this Northwest Indian War. And I'll go back now my maps. I need a map to point out. The old decrepit empires that fallen apart flags. Okay.
That one's not going to be happy with it.
Stalin's not on there. I got someone put Lenin and Marx up there years ago. Marx. I know, but she put it on there. The same person who drew that that's her face. You ever wonder what that was? Yeah. That was her senior volleyball night, like thinking like 2016, and she gave me the cardboard cutout, so I cherish it forever. And sitting it there. All right, so back to this. Tecumseh started a Confederacy, much like what Blue Jacket did, or for that matter, Pontiac. And the realization was, if we don't unify, so I didn't talk about this at all, we don't unify, the United States will crush us. And this has been a common facet, especially considering how they've been ravaged by disease. He was very pragmatic. So this would be called the Tecumseh Confederacy. He was a Shawnee. He went to various tribes and just made it very clear. If we don't become more independent and quit only trading for trade goods for the United States and muskets, we lost our old way. Or the big one, get addicted to rum and whiskey. If we don't become independent, we will be crushed. And he encouraged them to make their own clothes, go back to making their bow and arrows again. And what's very effective, he would become quite influential and terrify the United States by 1810. And then his brother, so I didn't tell you this, we didn't go through this at all.
How to say his name?
Yeah, we've tried to say his name, yeah. Who the Americans call, the United States called the Prophet, as they English speakers. He was a religious leader of the Shawnees, and he used a more spiritual idea that if we believe enough, that we would be on the right side of. They were polytheistic, so multiple gods. And he also, in 1809, predicted an eclipse and said that the sun will disappear to show basically the power of my ways, that if you follow this confederacy, we can win. And he even predicted the exact time and the exact moment and said during the day, the sun will disappear. And he had thousands of followers come watching to see if the sun disappeared. And guess what happened? It disappeared. Just like he said. I mean, you make the sun disappear, you got credibility. People go, oh, wow, I kind of like the sun. I mean, when it's going to be 42 below zero on Saturday, you guys be wanting the sun. It won't do you any good. Yes?
Where's the story about this? Because there's going to be an eclipse, and it's what the date is that this draws.
It wasn't him, but others had. So they didn't know the exact time then. You want to know why? 3 years earlier, Jefferson had brought a number of leaders from the various tribes who were trying to wow them so they would basically give up their land. Brought them to Philadelphia, which was kind of the center of science in the United States. And the prophet got an almanac. And in the almanac predicted the exact time of the eclipse. And he very carefully checked off the dates on the almanac and waited and waited and waited. Eclipse. The problem is, once you predict the sun disappearing, your followers are going to want more. Give us more. We want more miracle. And he started making these outlandish promises and soon had thousands of people from various tribes who went to a little town. They literally called it Prophet's Town, right here in Indiana, where they came thousands to hear more. And he started making these more elaborate proclamations, like, for example, if you believe hard enough, you will become bulletproof and invisible, and the ultimate warriors against the United States. This might have consequences down the road. Well, Tecumseh, they draw him like this. You might notice the way his face is. This was done 50 years later. And he had such kind of this aura about him that he was drawn this way because they gave him more European features to him. And the reason why was that it's literally just at the kind of beginning of this very racialized period, especially after the Civil War. And if he is smart and he is talented and somebody who must fear, he must have European ancestry too. And so they drew him like that. Now, maybe he did, maybe he didn't, but there's no indication of it. I'll show you examples of more of the United States doing that, but also Japan. This is closer to what he looked like. This is a watercolor but it shows him. He liked wearing British military uniforms too. That was really a common thing. A little bit more like he looked like, and this is closer to what his brother looked like. One eye. Why?
Played with bow and arrows.
Yeah, thou shalt play bow and arrows. A lot of one-eyed young men and young kids in various tribes. Play with stuff. Because I remember when I was a kid, we had a little bow and arrow with a suction cup we'd shoot at each other. Do they still sell those?
Kind of.
I hope so. That and bits of broken glass would be great for kids. But, so we're jumping right to here. William Henry Harrison. William Henry Harrison was the territorial governor of Indiana. He was from a wealthy plantation owner, same kind of deal as George Washington. Second son, wanted to get rich. He was very ambitious, intelligent, not like brilliant, but intelligent, very, very ambitious. I mean, wanted to be rich, a lot like Washington. And he was in Vincennes, which was the capital of Indiana Territory the U.S. got from one of those unequal treaties about 8 years before this. Vincennes was an old British fort. And he heard not only about groupings of thousands at Prophetstown up here in more northern Indiana, but he also heard that Tecumseh had gone south that fall of 1811 to try to encourage the powerful tribes here, especially the Creek, to join the Confederacy. And that, if they could have got those tribes, the Creek, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, to join, it might have changed everything. I mean, this is kind of the last chance for the tribes. He heard about this and marched up with a force of a couple thousand militia and cannon, set up a couple supply bases along the way, and marched up to Prophetstown. Now, Tecumseh had warned his brother, don't do anything rash, because he knew combination of his brother was rash, but also there's going to be a lot of pressure on him to do something. Wait till I get back. But Harrison arrived while Tecumseh was still in what is now Tennessee, or what was in Tennessee too. And so, Harrison arrived and immediately had his men dig in. He wasn't strong enough to take Prophetstown, but they dug trenches in I keep going backwards. A triangular little fortification, dug trenches and waited. Just across Tippecanoe Creek and the creeks, or Tippecanoe River right here, and this is called Burnett Creek, but it's Tippecanoe Creek. This is where the big Prophetstown was, and waited. And for 2 nights inside the camp, especially young men, begged the prophet, attack, we got to get him, attack. You said we were bulletproof. Let's attack. And finally he did. Ordered attack, and unlike the normal way that they had fought, hit and run, using the tree and cover, they did, this kind of shows up, massive wave attacks against men in trenches, charging up against cannon with grape shot. And for the entire day, they attacked and attacked. Knew they broke through a couple times, but were pushed back. This is one of the shots of the militia pushing them back. And at the end of the day, thousands of Shawnee and other members of the Confederacy were killed or wounded, and this was one of the most decisive American U.S. victories in history. U.S. victories. Decisive. And in a way, it changed everything. Tippecanoe, they wouldn't know right away how much it changed it, but it would grow in its importance. Tippecanoe. It ended, not completely, but ended the Indian threat to the northwest. Never again will they be able to unify. In fact, Tecumseh would have no choice but to flee north. When he got back, furious at his brother. But also, citizens of the United States with this battle, but also the War of 1812, started to change what they called themselves, what they referred to themselves. No longer as New Yorkers or Virginians or whatever state they might be, but more and more as we're Americans. And this is ours. Before 1800, if you would have said, look, there's a group of Americans, most people would have thought you were referring to tribal members of the various tribes. But more and more citizens of the United States. And what a statement that is. Nobody else in this continent says they're Americans. No one else says this is our continent, except for the United States. This is ours. territories. We own it. That's a big shift. We'll talk a little bit more about that down the road. But also, they blame the British. Here is a propaganda poster. It's probably not true, but it's implying that British officers were paid members of the Confederacy to get the scalps of US soldiers. There was probably scalping in Europe, there was probably scalping in America, but this would be a common way to show that you have won, to show that you're brave, but also, just a sec. Heck? Okay, good. Also to show that you are being a mercenary for the British, which is not at all what happened. They didn't fight because the British gave them money, but the United States claimed that, especially when Tecumseh fled to Canada. And so there's going to be a lot of desire to go to war with the British. And that will lead directly to the War of 1812. You could argue, probably it's a good argument to say the War of 1812, Tippecanoe was actually part of it. But technically it's not. But Tippecanoe, now Tippecanoe is going to be such a big battle. 29 years later, William Henry Harrison is going to run for president with his running mate John Tyler. And his slogan is going to be Tippecanoe and Tyler too. 29 years later, that will still have great meaning. And Harrison will be the oldest man ever elected president up to that time. And partially because of Tippecanoe. He'd also be the shortest term president in American history. That's another story for down the road. So, War of 1812. Even before Tippecanoe, partially because of the issues along the Northwest, but also powerful tribes like the Creek in the South, a group of young congressmen were elected, known as the War Hawks. The War Hawks. Now, the term hawk means war, and so will mean war because of this. So you talk about those for the war will be known as hawks, and people against the war eventually be called doves. This will really become common in the Vietnam War, for example. But they wanted war with the British. And their big idea was they wanted to knock out the British so they won't help the American Indians and so they can get this land. And when I mean this land, I mean all this land. The whole thing. Get it all. These are plantation owners, but they're Westerners and Southerners desperate for land. So in the wild west of Kentucky, we have Grundy, who became pretty prominent, but he got quite ill, so he left the public stage. But Henry Clay is going to be one of the most important politicians for the next 30 years and 3 weeks of this class. Henry Clay will be everywhere, and they're going to push for war. These are young, if I didn't tell you the party, they were Republicans. Same party as Madison. Same party as Jefferson. But now they were aggressive. And they're no longer this generation that were around when the U.S. just started hoping it would survive. Now they're thinking, we're here and we want more. More wealth, more land, more for us. Oh, and that guy. That guy too. And so these would all be it. Who would know who that guy is? What? John C. Calhoun. Who's one of the worst men ever lived? That's Calhoun of South Carolina. And he is going to be ubiquitous in this next 3 weeks too. There's Calhoun. This is 1840s when they finally have photography. And look at that finger. There's like 6 joints. That'd be a great Halloween costume, don't you agree? That would scare children for years. You want to see one more picture of Calhoun?
Yeah.
Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have neck hair? 50 points extra credit, whoever can grow neck hair by Thanksgiving. I know some of you are thinking that's unfair. I don't make the rules. That horrible man did. That's Calhoun. Madison did not want war. But remember, the Cadora letter, the United States is now embargoing Britain because of Macon's Bill No. 2, and then Tippecanoe. There's growing anti-British feeling. All through 1812, Madison is being pushed for war. And finally, very reluctantly, he asked for war. And on June 19, 1812, for the first time in history, Congress declared war. Now, I put the vote down, not because you do not need to know the number. I put that down to show you that it was not unanimous. There was a huge anti-war section, huge, mostly in the Northeast. And it was close in the Senate. This was not a popular war. And it was unclear about militia and power, so this was a big deal. There were three big reasons. The first one we've talked about, that's neutrality rights. What is it called when they were kidnapping sailors because of the orders in council? Yeah, impressment. And then also the British or the French not allowing ships in. Now we claim neutrality rights, but those aren't the biggies. The biggies are, remember Tippecanoe. Security, meaning they want to wipe out the American Indian threat to the expansion of the United States. And Canada. Back in 1775, the Continental Congress actually authorized an invasion of Canada, hoping they would join the United States. It failed miserably. Benedict Arnold was there. But the assumption was everybody wants to be American. All we got to do is just go into Canada and they'll join immediately. And think about all that land the United States will get. Ironically, just a couple weeks before the declaration of war, Britain, desperate for American cotton because of the Industrial Revolution, they repealed the orders, but they didn't know in Washington, D.C. Took too long to get across the Atlantic. So it's another one of those what ifs. What if Britain would have repealed it and would have got there before the declaration? Don't know. Probably wouldn't have declaration of war. Now, Madison didn't want this war, but there would be a euphoria for this war almost immediately, and it's going to be dubbed his war. At first, yeah, we're going to war, Madison, to, oh, Madison's war. Now, there's no Federalist support. New England voted against it. In fact, New England, I put down as no support. New England even contemplated secession by the end of 1814. That's another one of the great what-ifs in history. What if they had seceded? Once again, everything be different. Also, we had no military. Nothing prepared. A tiny army. There were a few ships, but half of them couldn't even sail. In fact, you don't need to know the numbers. We only had 6,700 men in uniform, and most were militia. Eventually 35,000, but still untrained militia. We only had 7 ships that could sail. Britain had over 200 ships of the line. We had no ships of the line. But we thought we had an advantage because, first off, there's this glorification of militia. The feeling that the Minutemen won the Revolutionary War, which, as we know, militia in set-piece combat, what do they usually do? Run. But we thought Britain was occupied with France. France seemed unbeatable. In fact, France had just started an invasion of Russia with over 600,000 troops. And the assumption was Britain will be so occupied with France. No, we did not realize what's going to happen to the French army in the invasion of Russia. Some of you know. I would avoid invading Russia in late summer, fall, and winter. That's just a little piece of advice. Russia, big. Moving on. And they didn't really win any battles, but won the war. And then that Bank of the United States, they chartered that bank way back in 1791. Well, the charter ran out, and Madison was opposed, so they made a big deal. No more bank. We won't have the bank curtailing us. Well, there's nothing to control the money supply. And the entire financial system of the United States collapsed just when we're going to war. Ironically, Madison would sign the bank rechartering 5 years later because it was such a disaster. And he still hated the bank, but felt they had no choice. The U.S. is unprepared, but the assumption was they'll join up. And before the war could get really bad for the United States, Madison would win an overwhelming re-election. But you see, the Federalist area is opposed. New York was opposed. and this would have a great impact after or during the war. So the U.S. is going to invade Canada. That's the plan. We'll get Canada. They will join up immediately. Now, the traditional invasion paths, Lake Champlain. Remember the Battle of Saratoga? That's the same area they invaded. Niagara right here near present-day Buffalo, New York, and then Fort Detroit right here. That was a 3 American invasion, almost all with militia. That's all we had. Anybody want to know how they went, those invasions? Terrible, unbelievably bad, so embarrassing it's hard to put in terms bad. All 3 failed miserably. In fact, at Niagara, the New York militia refused to follow along, so they watched the American army get defeated right out at the Battle of Niagara. The militia just watched. And at Detroit, it was so bad. General Hall was the commander of American forces. He was kind of this fossil remnant of the Revolutionary War. And he was so infirm he could hardly mount a horse anymore. So ill. He was supposed to invade here with mostly militia, over 3,000 militia. Facing him were less than 1,500 British soldiers and Tecumseh, and about 500 mostly Shawnee and Miami tribal members. Hall saw these forces and ran away back to the fort. Huddled in the fort, the British knew they didn't have enough supplies or men to take the fort or besiege it. And so what they did is, think about it, they're in the fort, really heavily forested, a couple little clearings, and in the clearing about 1.5 miles away. So we're in the fort 1.5 miles away, in this clearing. The British, they had the regimental band, big band, drums, and they could see and hear them just way out in the distance, march across the field, followed by a column of British soldiers and all their artillery and horses, followed by Tecumseh's men, march across the field. Then as soon as that band got to the edge of the field, they kept playing. The next men got across the field into the forest, outside of Detroit. Anybody know what they did? Yeah, they sprinted around and marched across again. So this big circle, they just marched around in the circle. And so Hall thought he was outnumbered 10-1, surrendered without firing a shot. That's how bad it was. And by 1830, overnight, it looked like it was going to be a disaster. But there'd be 2 victories we have to get to. One, right here on Lake Erie, the Battle of Put-in-Bay, or the Battle of Lake Erie. A scratch American fleet built on the lake defeated a scratch British fleet. Admiral Oliver Hazard Perry, yes, his middle name was Hazard. He was a commander, or commodore, that's a term for it. Fleet commander. And he sent back word to Washington, D.C. after the victory with the very famous, "We have met the enemy, and they are ours." That is pretty cool. You got it. That's pretty cool. Now, this is not a victory that turned the tide of the war, but it was a victory. And then Harrison was put in command of Detroit. They crossed over into Canada on a raid, and at the Battle of the Thames, in October 1813, William Henry Harrison, and now more regular forces, better trained, they met British forces and the remnants of Tecumseh's Confederacy. The British fled the field and left the outnumbered, mostly Shawnee, to fight this battle. They would eventually be overwhelmed, and Tecumseh would be killed. Thus ending Tecumseh. I'll tell you one more story about Tecumseh a little bit later, but Tecumseh is going to have just great power. Like in Ohio for years, talking about Tecumseh, how intelligent he was, but how scared he was. They tell little children, you better go to bed, you better shut your eyes or Tecumseh will get you. Well into the 20th century, I know that sounds horrible, one of the most famous generals in American history, from a very famous family, Sherman, was named William Tecumseh Sherman, from the Civil War. His brother was a famous senator, John Sherman. And of course, Harrison will get all the credit. Well, in 1814, the British, now with Napoleon just about defeated, They decided to knock out the United States once for all, maybe scoop up some American land, who knows? And so, they have more ships now because France is basically now being subdued. Napoleon will soon be sent to Elba. They come back for a little battle called Waterloo, some of you might know about in 1815, but strengthened the blockade, which strangled the United States, which had been through years of embargo, etc., these problems. Then they were going to invade right here at Lake Champlain, and then invade a raid at Washington. American forces raided the British colonial capital at York, right here, present-day Toronto, and burnt it down. So, all right, United States, we'll get you. But here's the biggie, the prize. Take New Orleans. And what they're thinking is, whatever treaty comes out of this, Britain, if they can be sitting here in New Orleans, they might get it. Who knows? And so, not going to tell you the whole story about this one. This attack failed. They tried to attack this way, but it was too late in the year. They were defeated on Lake Champlain. We're not going to talk about that battle, but I will tell you about, where's my mouse? Yeah, the Chesapeake campaign. So they had to wait till summer. And so August and September of 1814, the Royal Navy sailed up Chesapeake Bay. Here's Washington, D.C. They did the Navy up the Potomac as a diversion. And then they landed overland and were going to march on D.C. And this was a raid. And then go up to Baltimore and take Baltimore. Now, there are more American forces that are getting experience. And some pretty good generals. Harrison was no slouch, and maybe one of the first great American generals, Winfield Scott, had won a victory up here with trained forces. The problem is, there's no roads. There are no roads in the United States, except for wagon routes, basically. So they couldn't get to Washington, D.C. So there was just 5,000 militia and maybe 100 regular soldiers and Marines to defend D.C. Almost 5,000 crack British forces that had been fighting in Spain for 5 years against the French. That was a world war. They were great soldiers. And a lot of recruits. The British did the same thing they did in the Revolutionary War. Any slaves that joined them would get freed. They did the same thing. And so, when they marched overland, Bladensburg was the last place where they figured they could stop them. It was a pretty good place to defend. There was a river and then a stone wall. This would be called the Battle of Bladensburg. And this is a map from the Battle of Bladensburg, and this pretty much shows it pretty good. Do I need to tell you what happened? You guys got it, right? Involved arrows. Not going to go through the whole battle. They crossed the river, but right here was a stone fence about that high. So here's the main road. Here's D.C. right down here. There's a stone fence on either side, and then swampy area. And so the thought was militia would run away. But if they had a stone fence right here, they'd stand and fight. Make sense? They'd stand and fight. And Madison, his Secretary of State Monroe, other members of the cabinet, members of Congress came down to watch the battle. They're on a little hill right here watching it. To watch the fun. And so when the British brushed through the first forces here, they marched to here to the militia. And the militia were told to hunker down, and then once again, don't fire till they charge. Now, General Ross, the British commander, realized this is a raid. We have to go fast. This is not a long-term invasion. Get to Washington, D.C., burn it down, leave. That's the plan. And so they're going to march to 50 yards. Fire one round, fixed bayonet, charge. Put your rifle on your hip and charge. That's the plan. Using the same weapons they used in the Revolutionary War. Brown vest, muskets, haven't changed. So they got to right here. They fired. And then they began a fast march out. The American militia took their muskets out, took very careful aim, and what? Ran. They took off running, threw their weapons, and ran as fast as they could. The British followed them. They ran all the way to Washington, D.C. The British couldn't catch him. They called it the Bladensburg races. It was a total humiliation. Madison, was on his horse. He immediately had to ride back. Barely got his family out of the executive mansion when the British arrived. There's a plaque just a little bit to the west of the executive mansion today. It's called the White House. That said, this is where President Madison stood watching British forces enter. There's another plaque near the present-day Library of Congress. It says the same thing about the Capitol. This is where President Madison watched British forces enter the Capitol. They came in, took it, and they did exactly what you would expect they would do. Started looting everything and stealing everything they could. Going to the Capitol, ripping things off, burnt down the White House. If they couldn't steal it, they broke it. In the House of Representatives, a room about the size of these two classrooms together. It's the old House chambers. It's gone now. They just never going through with their bayonets, gouging out stuff, just breaking things. General Ross realized he had to go. He went to the Speaker's dais, Speaker of the House, which we don't have a Speaker of the House, which is kind of mind-boggling today. We are very dysfunctional, but, well, parts of us are. General Ross went to him and started beating his pistol against the dais. The men weren't here. The men couldn't hear him. They're breaking stuff. I mean, think how much fun they must have had just breaking stuff. You got to admit, that would be pretty fun. Why just go to a room right now and start breaking stuff? Should we do it? Should we do it? Finally, he shot his pistol in the air. The men all kind of stopped and looked at him. And he goes, men, this is a parliament. So we'll have a vote. Shall we burn it? So they burned the Capitol. And if you go there today and take a tour of the Capitol, in the basement of the Capitol, in the foundations, there are still scorch marks from 1812 or 1814. And at the columns in the front of the now White House, there are still musket balls there. Musket balls in the columns to this day. All right, who needs to? I'm just going to print a bunch. I'm sorry. Who got to blame for this? I can't blame me. Because the battery ran out, and you're going to take the mic. So what am I doing? Coffee. Yeah. You got halfway through the map and you finished the map, and now you want me to give you the map.
Yeah.
I don't even remember what the story's about.
You won't get the full extra credit, but I'll give you a chance to go find your map, okay? I'm getting the copies.
Yeah, never mind.
Hard to believe that 1812 kind of ended up being a draw.
Oh,
We were the same
it was pure fluke, but it was a big.
Purely because of New Orleans, but
It's not like. Give me a second. It's It wants me to sign in. I was going to just put PDF. It wants me to sign in.
How cool.
oh no, I gotta so.
Hi.
Come on, you can print. There we go. The light came on. All's good.
I think I was gone when you collected Jefferson. Do you just want it in the bin?
Yeah, put it in the
Thank you.
print. Let me try again. I don't know why it's not there. Positive print. Sorry about that. I blame society.
No, actually.
Yeah, I get it. There should be some copies up there, yeah. Yeah.
I'm not, but I do have capital. Bro, what? Dude, I should have.
Right now?
I should
Man, if you're in now, you can write on this stuff. Put the letters right next to the numbers. Yeah.
And then,
Come on.
well, I just like circled it today.
I don't care about that. You're gonna miss it. You're gonna miss it. Oh my God.
I just like some of it,
I'm just like, it's really nice.
That ain't a mess, that's like a little coloring method.
It's not like charged.
Yeah.
It's
gonna be like-
What the? We've
We've already done it before, so